We're not talking about fireworks or confrontations. We're talking about poised defiance, the kind that draws everyone's attention because it doesn't conform to expectations. It breaks the script. When everyone assumes the conversation will go a certain way, and then someone walks in calm, collected, and chooses to rewrite the narrative. That's not just powerful, that's disruptive. And in global politics, disruption isn't chaos. Disruption is clarity. It's alignment. It's one person or one nation declaring that their voice matters. And not in the shadows, not in second place, but right in the center where all eyes meet. The world is used to seeing power in very specific forms, loud declarations, military strength, economic dominance. But the world is changing. And in that change, new languages of influence are emerging. One of them is the language of dignity, the ability to speak from a place of deeply rooted identity, unshaken by pressure, unseduced by flattery. That's not just leadership, that's evolution. And that evolution was visible at the summit. Because when the tables turned, it wasn't about someone flipping them, it was about someone choosing not to sit at the old table anymore. They brought their own chair, their own voice, and suddenly the room had to rearrange itself. That's the beauty of shifting dynamics. They don't have to be loud to be seismic. Sometimes it's one carefully chosen sentence, one elegant but piercing correction, one refusal to echo someone else's narrative. And when that happens on an international platform, it's not just policy, it's performance. A performance not for applause, but for remembrance. Because history always remembers the moments when someone decided not to follow the script, but to speak from truth. That's when the cameras turn, that's when the analysts pause, and that's when the world listens differently, not because they were forced to, but because they had no choice. It's uncomfortable for those who aren't used to being challenged. It stings, especially when the challenge comes from someone who doesn't raise their voice, someone who, with just a few words, reveals a deeper, more uncomfortable truth, the kind of truth that makes empires rethink their assumptions. That's when you realize this isn't just about diplomacy. It's about identity, about history, about reclaiming a seat that was never actually lost, only temporarily denied. So when that moment happened, at that precise moment when someone stood at a podium and redirected the entire energy of the room, it wasn't a surprise to those who had been watching closely. It was coming. It had to. Because when you build your influence brick by brick, quietly, steadily, respectfully, there comes a time when you no longer need permission to speak your mind. You just do it. And the weight of that journey is heard in every word. And in that moment, it's no longer about one country versus another. It's about truth meeting pretense. And truth, even when softly spoken, always hits harder. You see, the global stage doesn't reward the loudest anymore. It rewards the clearest. It rewards those who walk in with a mirror instead of a mask. And sometimes that mirror shows something uncomfortable. It reveals that the world is no longer tilted in one direction, that power is not inherited, it's earned, and earned daily. And in that moment of reflection, you watch as longtime powers hesitate, unsure how to respond, because it's one thing to deal with opposition, it's another to deal with conviction. Conviction doesn't need to impress. It doesn't need applause. It simply exists. It walks into a room and shifts the balance without lifting a finger. And that's what happened. The table turned. The world listened differently. Not because someone forced it to, but because someone dared to say, I'm not here to follow your rhythm. I have my own. I'm not here to echo your values. I have my own. And I'm not here to seek validation. I am the validation. That's when true diplomacy happens, not in agreements alone, but in acknowledgments, not in silence, but in statements. And the world pays attention. Because once the balance shifts, it doesn't shift back. The voice that has risen doesn't go back into silence. The presence that has emerged doesn't disappear. And everyone watching knows From this point on, the conversation is different. The dynamics are different. The power has a new face, and it doesn't need to shout. It just needs to speak. Respect isn't given, it's commanded. And on the world stage, that truth has never been more evident. Respect isn't about titles, flags, or the size of your economy. It isn't about how many allies you can call in a moment of crisis. True respect is about the presence you bring into the room and the weight of your words when you choose to speak. Because when you step onto that stage, no one hands you respect as a gift. You have to earn it, moment by moment, sentence by sentence, choice by choice. And when you do, when you command it, not demand it, the whole world feels the shift. In the delicate art of diplomacy, every gesture speaks. The handshake that lingers a little too long, the glance that isn't returned, the phrasing of a single answer, these aren't just details, they're signals. They send messages louder than speeches. And when someone stands firm, delivering those signals with poise, it becomes undeniable. This is not a voice to be patronized, not a voice to be overlooked. It is a voice that shapes the room simply by existing within it. That's what it means to command respect. It's not about aggression. It's about an energy that tells the world, I know who I am and I will not shrink. There's something powerful in watching someone step into that kind of power without theatrics, without the need for drama. Because the truth is, respect that's shouted for often sounds like desperation, but respect that's commanded is silent, calm, and unshakable. And that's exactly what unfolded in that moment. It wasn't just words, it was presence, a presence so strong that it made even the loudest voices lower, if only for a moment, because they knew they were in the company of someone who would not be swayed or diminished. Think about how often the world mistakes politeness for weakness. When someone chooses their words carefully, it's assumed they're hesitant. When they don't respond with anger, it's assumed they're powerless. But true power doesn't flinch. True power doesn't need to raise its tone to be heard. True power is measured, deliberate, almost understated, and that's why it unsettles those who rely on intimidation. When someone like that commands the floor, they don't have to demand your attention. You give it because you can feel deep down that what they're saying will not bend to your comfort. In that summit, it was clear no favors were being asked for and no favors were being handed out. What was being established was far more important. The simple fact that respect would no longer be optional. Respect would be required. Every sentence carried that energy. Every answer seemed to say, we are here as equals, and you will address us as such. That's a line you can't fake. You can't script it. You can't stage it. It has to come from a place of absolute clarity about who you are and how you expect to be treated. The reaction to that was telling. You could almost feel the pause, the kind of pause that happens when people realize they are no longer in control of the tone of the conversation. That's the thing about commanding respect. It doesn't leave space for condescension. It doesn't leave space for manipulation. It sets the terms of engagement instantly, and once those terms are set, the entire room adjusts. That's not something you can interrupt. That's not something you can correct. It's a shift that once made cannot be undone. Respect on that stage was not a gift wrapped in polite applause. It was a force, one that insisted on being recognized. And that insistence wasn't aggressive or hostile. It was graceful, even elegant. But make no mistake, it was unyielding. Because true respect doesn't ask, it doesn't plead, it simply is. It walks into the room, and every other presence has to reckon with it. And here's the deeper truth, the kind of truth that makes even powerful nations uncomfortable. Respect doesn't flow in one direction anymore. The old hierarchies, the unspoken rules about who deserves deference of recracking. And in those cracks, something new is growing, a new balance, a new understanding. And when someone embodies that balance, they become impossible to ignore. So in that moment, when the statements were made, when the world's cameras turned, and every word hung heavy in the air, it wasn't just about policy or politics. It was about something deeper, self-respect, becoming a force that reshaped the dynamics of the room. And the remarkable thing about respect that is commanded, not given, is that once it's there, it can't be taken back. It leaves a mark. It changes the way everyone in that room will approach the conversation from that day forward. That's the quiet revolution that happened. Not with shouting, not with threats, but with the simple, undeniable reality that respect is not optional anymore. It's not up for negotiation. It's commanded. And when it's commanded with that much presence, the world has no choice but to listen. Sometimes humility feels like humiliation, depending on who's watching. That's the uncomfortable truth about perspective. What one person sees as grace, another might misinterpret as weakness. What one nation sees as a bold declaration of identity, another might feel as a sting, a bruise to its pride. And in moments like this summit, that tension was thick in the air, because there's a fine, almost invisible line between holding your ground with quiet dignity and being accused of cutting someone else down. The difference isn't in the act. It's in the eyes of those witnessing it. Think about it. Humility at its core is not about bowing or shrinking. It's about standing so firmly in who you are that you don't need to puff yourself up. It's about letting your truth speak without forcing it on anyone. But when that kind of grounded humility meets those who are used to being deferred to, it can feel jarring. It can feel like a slap, even when no slap was intended. Why? Because for so long, the unspoken rules of power have been clear. Some voices dominate, some voices accommodate, and when that balance shifts, the dominant voices aren't just surprised, they feel exposed. What unfolded wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no pounding fists. There was just an unshakable calm. Words delivered with a steadiness that made it clear. This wasn't about disrespect. It was about truth. But truth, even when dressed in humility, can sting like arrogance to those who aren't ready to hear it. And that's exactly why the moment felt so raw. To the one speaking, it was simple. State the facts. Defend your nation's dignity. Make it clear where the lines are drawn. But to those on the receiving end, there was a different story. Their comfort cracked, their assumptions faltered, and in that crack, the feeling of humiliation crept in. Not because they were truly humiliated, but because they were forced to confront a reality they weren't prepared for. That's the thing about humility. It can be a mirror. And sometimes when that mirror is held up, people don't see grace. They see the reflection of their own insecurities. This moment at the summit wasn't about gloating, and it certainly wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about standing tall without apology. But for those accustomed to others bending, even standing tall can feel confrontational. That's the irony. The more dignified the tone, the deeper. Or the cut seems to those who expect compliance. Because dignity has a sharpness. It slices through old expectations, quietly but undeniably. The world saw that sharpness. It wasn't violent, it wasn't ugly, but it was real. And as the words landed, you could feel the shift, the unease, the recalibration. There was no attempt to soften the truth to make it more palatable. No attempt to play nice just to soothe fragile pride. The message was clear. Humility does not mean submission. And when humility is misread as humiliation, that's not on the one who spoke. That's on the one who heard it through the lens of their own discomfort. There's power in that kind of moment because it forces everyone to rethink what strength looks like. For too long, strength has been painted as loud, forceful, dominant. But what if true strength is quiet? What if it's the ability to say what must be said without anger, without theatrics, without fear of who might feel unsettled? That's what happened here. And that's why it stung for some, because it wasn't weakness they were seeing. It was an unshakable strength they couldn't quite control, and that is the shift. When humility, real humility, enters the room, it doesn't kneel, it doesn't bow its head. It looks straight ahead with clear eyes, and it speaks from a place that cannot be shaken. To those open to it, that's inspiring. To those resistant, it feels like humiliation because it reveals the imbalance they've relied on for so long. So yes, for some, this summit felt like humiliation. For others, it felt like vindication. But the truth, it was neither. It was humility, pure and simple, the kind that stands tall, the kind that won't be distorted into apology, the kind that says, I will speak my truth and you will hear it. And if that feels like humiliation to anyone, it only proves how much the world has changed and how much further it still has to go. The world stage doesn't forgive weakness. It rewards authenticity. In the theater of global power, every glance, every pause, every single word carries more weight than most people realize. Leaders from across the globe step up to microphones, sit at long tables, shake hands in front of cameras, and in those moments, the world isn't just listening to what's said. It's feeling how it's said. You can't fake that kind of energy. You can't fabricate real conviction. You either bring it or you don't. And when you don't, the world senses the hesitation instantly. But when you do, when you walk into that space with a voice that is unapologetically your own, the room shifts. That's what authenticity does. It disrupts expectations. It silences noise. It has a way of cutting through scripted talking points and diplomatic pleasantries and saying, this is who I am, this is who we are, and we will not pretend to be anything else. That's why the moment hit so hard at this summit, because what was delivered wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration, not of superiority, not of defiance, but of identity. And identity, when spoken with complete honesty, carries more power than any threat ever could. Weakness on that stage isn't about making mistakes. It isn't about being outnumbered. Weakness is pretending. Weakness is trying to mold yourself into someone else's idea of acceptable. Weakness is speaking in borrowed voices, repeating borrowed phrases, hoping to win approval. That's what the world sees through every single time. But authenticity has no need for approval. It doesn't perform, it doesn't pander. It simply stands there and says, take it or leave it. This is me. When that authenticity showed up, it changed the dynamic instantly. The tone shifted, the power shifted, because suddenly the summit wasn't a stage for rehearsed lines. It became a place of reckoning. And those who are used to controlling the script felt that loss of control like a sting. Because when someone is authentic, they can't be easily managed. You can't lure them with flattery. You can't shame them into silence. And you certainly can't predict their words because their words aren't calculated to comfort you. They're chosen to honor their own truth. The beauty of that moment was how effortless it seemed. There was no grand display, no angry theatrics, no need to raise a voice to command the room. Just calm, direct, unpolished truth. And that's why it worked. Because the world is tired of polished masks, tired of staged smiles, tired of hollow words that mean nothing. When someone shows up with realness, even those who feel threatened by it can't help but pay attention. And yet, authenticity isn't always comfortable. It doesn't always make friends. It doesn't always land gently. Because when someone speaks from their core, they inevitably challenge the illusions others have been living under. And some of those illusions cracked that day. You could almost see it, the way certain faces tightened, the way the energy in the room shifted, the way silence hung heavier after certain statements. That's what authenticity does. It doesn't smooth over reality. It strips away the pretense. In a world full of leaders who carefully curate their every word, every gesture, every smile to maintain an image, authenticity feels almost radical. It feels raw. It feels bold. But more than anything, it feels undeniable. Because deep down, every single person in that room and every single person watching knows the difference between a line meant for applause and a line meant from the heart. And once you hear the real thing, you can't go back to pretending you didn't. The world stage will forgive mistakes. It will even forgive boldness that borders on uncomfortable. But it will not forgive fakeness, because fakeness crumbles under pressure and pressure is constant. Authenticity, though, it doesn't crumble. It doesn't need to. It holds. It sustains. And that's what we saw in that moment. Words that didn't wobble, a presence that didn't shrink, a truth that didn't dress itself up to please anyone else. From that moment on, the conversation was different. The room was different, because once authenticity takes root, there's no going back to pretense. And those who thought they could dominate the narrative realized they weren't facing weakness. They were facing something far more dangerous to their comfort: honesty. The kind of honesty that doesn't need validation. The kind of honesty that doesn't backtrack. The kind of honesty that makes even the most powerful nations rethink how they approach the table. And that is the real lesson from this summit. Weakness bends, weakness mimics, weakness hides. But authenticity stands still. Authenticity holds the line. Authenticity commands respect without demanding it. And when the world saw that kind of authenticity in action, it did what it always does when confronted with the undeniable. It stopped, it listened, and it understood, even if it didn't want to admit it.